Everybody, we are here and pretty much on time. 1 minute late. Pretty good.
That's
for
pretty
us.
good for us.
Yeah,
On a
philosophy
Friday,
for the
yeah.
people. Freaky Friday. Welcome to the show. We're going to talk about panpsychism, the case for panpsychism. Don't misunderstand us. We're not saying that either of us endorse panpsychism. We just want to show the motivations of why certain people endorse panpsychism. I am actually highly critical of it. Jim, maybe a little less critical than I am, but
Oh wait for the second.
But you gotta
episode.
wait.
Yeah.
We gotta wait for
Yeah.
part 2. We want to just do
Right.
some philosophical stage setting and stuff in this episode.
Steel
help people
manning.
understand it.
Steel manning.
And this is steel manning, always appropriate. And this is really in connection. Fireworks, confetti, launch it all. Jim has another new project, a Substack. Finally got Jim on Substack, and his first series is on panpsychism. And this is something we've been wanting to do for a while, and Jim and I have been sharing some thoughts behind the scenes, and he's got a really interesting kind of sociological way of looking at panpsychism, which I hope we get into either today or at least some part in the series, which is different than the usual critiques. And speaking of usual critiques, I do want to acknowledge that there's a bit of an exchange going on right now between Ed Fazer, who's critical of panpsychism, and Philip Goff, who's obviously a proponent. And we might have some things to say about that. I thought that was a good exchange as well. So panpsychism is in the air. It's relevant in today's moment in many different ways. So I'm happy to do this episode. Dr. Jim, welcome back. How are you doing?
Thank you, man. Doing well. How you doing, Pat?
Good, man. Good.
Doing well.
It's Friday. It's freaky.
It's
all
freaky.
good.
Yeah. Freak show. Yeah, as you know, I had been meaning to do the something on panpsychism for like a year.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We've had a lot of people ask, what do you think of panpsychism? You just on the usual Friday question and answer thing. And I just had to work my way through the stack of projects to get down to where I could do that. And I've been meaning, yeah, it's always the case. I've been meaning to start a Substack. It just seems like it's a pretty easy way to transact business, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So this seemed to be a good way to do it. Yeah. So it's kind of coincidental that it happened. Like I was literally writing this thing when the Fazer Goff thing went down, right? So it's kind of coincidental that it happened that way. I think you'll see in the way I approach it, I'm kind of aloof to the particular dialectic going on between those two guys, right? I mean, I'm not criticizing. Like ultimately, I'm going to argue that panpsychism is just this like as put together by contemporary panpsychists like Goff. It's just a grand figure, and it's just doubling down on some of the darker shades in modernity, right?
Right.
But I don't necessarily criticize it along the same lines that Fazer does. I don't say those criticisms don't work. It's just not the thing I'm doing. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, right. You have a different angle of approach. By the way, it is Freaky Friday, so we'll do Q&A at the end. So if anybody has questions, please put them in the box. I saw there were questions here earlier. I still don't understand why those disappear. For some reason, there's like a time limit where if you put something in the chat box a couple hours before, it just like expires. I can't find them. They're gone. So if you're still here, please.
Are you looking at them on StreamYard or are you looking at them on YouTube?
No, this was earlier on YouTube that I saw. I know a couple of our frequent listeners, Catholic Base, had some comments. I don't remember what they are. So
yeah,
just repost them.
There was someone named Alfonso that had a couple of really good questions. So if Alfonso, if you're out there, hit us.
Yeah,
hit us with those questions.
Yeah, I don't know why YouTube does that, but it does. So, anyways, Jim, why don't we start ground zero? What is panpsychism? Let's just get an idea of what the theory is trying to articulate. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a book that came out in the 2000s, and I love that we say that now. Like, my great grandfather talked about like '06, right? We can talk about like '06 now, like the early 2000s, right? But anyway, by a guy named Scriba, I believe his name is, and there's another edition came out just last year. Anyway, and it's this panpsychism in the West or panpsychism in Western thought, and he basically is trying to argue that everybody has been a panpsychist, like everybody really smart has been a panpsychist from Plato all the way through contemporary people like Strawson, right, and Goff, right. Mm-hmm. and one of the things I want to do ultimately in this series is to push back against that, because I actually think what someone like Plato or Aristotle is up to has very little to do with what Goff is up to. Okay.
I
Or
totally.
Strawson. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to use Goff because I think he's the most interesting panpsychist out there right now. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And he frames the issue exactly the way I frame the issue. Okay. So
Yeah,
he's
right.
sort of my, like he's my frenemy among these people, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I hate to
Mm-hmm.
use that way, right? But anyway. So I actually think, ultimately where I want to go in this is like kind of what's going on in a lot of the people that are called panpsychists historically has really little to do with what someone like Goff is doing. Okay. Because, right, the title of Goff's, popular book, and I think it's a very good book. I really like this book. I think if someone asked me, hey, what's a
Galileo's
quick and
Error.
dirty introduction to
Mm-hmm.
philosophy of mind, I would direct them. Yeah, I would direct them to Galileo's Error. Right. If what's a quick and dirty, an interesting, right, sort of steelman version of panpsychism, I would direct them to Galileo's Error. Right. So I think it's a good book, and so but the title of the book is important. Okay, because Goff frames panpsychism, his version of it, and he was Galen Strawson's student, right? So like kind of the most influential strain of panpsychism in the in the Anglo-American university is coming through these guys, right? And Goff is now kind of the point of that spear. Okay, and he frames it entirely in terms of what he calls Galileo's error. It's a reaction to Galileo's error. Okay.
Yeah.
And what is Galileo's error for Goff? Well, basically, Galileo, everybody knows his story. He comes to the conclusion that the language of nature is mathematical, and that we can pretty much make grand predictions, better predictions by just looking at the quantitative properties of things, right? And basically, Galileo thinks of nature entirely in terms as a system of geometry, right? Okay,
Right.
he brilliantly shows how you can use a kind of static geometry to like make predictions that are temporally, dynamic and things like that. Of course, we're going to need the calculus to finish the job and all that, but that's going to come.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, and so on the one hand, Galileo says, look, I have no need of anything to understand nature but these quantitative geometric properties. Okay. But then what do you do now? Like, what do you do with colors that don't seem to be relevant to that? What do you do with, meaning, purpose, intentionality, all this stuff that we call now the mental, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you do with that? Right. And the way I put it in the paper is, you can't have worries about like intrinsic qualitative differences among things and meaning and purpose getting in the way of your really good technological science, right? Okay. So Galileo's solution to this, and I'm not saying it's necessarily he consciously thought of it this way, right? Although Goff kind of seems to think he did. Just said, hey, we're going to have two different worlds now. You're going to have
Two
the
realms,
world
right?
of
Mm-hmm.
nature, two realms. Yeah. You're going to have the world of nature that's geometric, right? And then you're going to have the world of the mental, right? That is qualitative, right?
Mm-hmm.
And meaningful, right? So you have meaning and quality on one side, right? And you have quantitative spatial relations on the other side, and that's it. And nary the tween shall meet. And that's the important thing for a lot of what I'm going to push here is the Faustian pact of modernity, or at least this expression of it, right, is that these two realms have got to be separate and independent, right? They cannot get in each other's way. Okay. We can't have the qualitative, purpose and all that getting in here and having effects in our quantitative nature, because then we can't make the predictions. That's going to be as if miracles, right? I mean, think of it like no one would have thought prior to Galileo that somehow the notion that our intentions affected things in nature, right, was tantamount to a miracle, right?
Right.
That's
Mm-hmm.
very common. It's a very common way of framing. Even C.S. Lewis does it. And this is one of the reasons why I loathe that kind of talk, right? Is even Lewis does it, right? Is that it seems like you have to have a miracle. You have to have a break in nature in order for there to be intention, purpose, qualitative considerations. Do you see that?
Right. Yeah. A picture
Why?
holds him
Because
captive. Poor guy. Mm-hmm.
a picture, yeah, poor guy. He too was held captive by this picture because this is our picture. This is modernity.
It is, right.
Modernity is Galileo's error, or Galileo's error is just one of the most influential manifestations of this error of modernity. I'm going to say error. Let's not beg that question just yet. But it's like one of the defining notions of modernity is that these two things are separate, but supposedly equal, right?
Right. And let's just clarify for
Yeah.
people who are new to this. You call it the familiar story because people who are in these circles, it is a familiar story, but it might not be familiar to everybody. The error isn't that science is good and science is useful. That's true, right? The error is sort of something like this, right? Thinking that the sort of this particular method, right, whatever that method is, that can capture all that is susceptible to mathematicization, call it, right?
Yep.
Exhausts natural reality, right? And so whatever isn't sort of captured by that method somehow isn't like part of nature, right? That's the mistake. And then, but you can't like eliminate it entirely, or maybe you can, right? And so this is or maybe you can at least think you can. And this is how it leads to other absurd, I would say, theories like eliminativism, right? What do you do with all this stuff that is not susceptible to mathematicization, right? Well, I guess we'll just have another realm. Here's dualism, or here's eliminativism, or as we're going to get to, here's panpsychism. That's just trying to really articulate what exactly the error is. It isn't that we're saying that, technology advancements and making accurate scientific predictions is bad. That's not it at all. It's a deeply philosophical error, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And the error is, or at least Goff is going to say it's the error, and I'm going to eventually say it's an error too, is the notion of separating these two things out entirely. Like to think that the only way we could have the science is if we kicked mentality out, right? And look at all, and really, like go to your favorite philosophical problem from that's happened in the last 4 centuries. It falls back to this, right? It falls back to this. Okay. Now, this is less important for the first part, but it's going to be more important really for the third part of this. But I want this kind of out there in the atmosphere. Is so on the one hand, if you think of on the one hand, by voiding nature of meaning and qualitative distinction, like we've pretty much said, there's nothing to kind of get in the way of our technological domination of it, right? It's all just geometric points that we can shove around. Geometrical points have no value in and of themselves. So, hey, and we could, like, the geometry lets us, or the calculus now, right? Like, lets us really know how to manipulate these things. So let's just go. We can like go ahead and, and like pick your favorite aficionado of the scientific revolution, whether it's, Bacon saying, we can make a new Eden, literally says this, by going with this new method, or Descartes saying we will become the masters and commanders of nature, right? With this new science, right? Because what have we done? Like we've said, look, there's nothing to constrain us in terms of meaning, purpose, right? What things are in themselves and what makes them valuable, right? Everything's just the same. It's all just flat geometry, and we can do with it what we will. Okay. And let's face it, that is a big part of modernity, culturally, sociologically, ideologically, right? Okay. On the other hand, right? Okay. So what we've done is, on the one hand, we've liberated nature from mind, right? From meaning, from purpose, from quality. Okay. In the sense of liberation, meaning we're liberated to do with it what we will, right? On the other side, what have we done? We've like liberated mind from nature, right? There's like mind does not now answer to something like the order of nature anymore. Like natural law is done, right? Okay, because mind, right? Value, meaning, purpose, qualitative difference, all of that is just quote unquote in the head now, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So your fact value distinction, there it is, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. This is
there it is.
Teleology. It's all gone right. All this stuff. It's not just qualia, right? This is right. This is far more. The acid burns far deeper than that. Right? It's not just qualia. I mean, for me, the most significant things are the normative aspects, right? And the ethical implications of this worldview, not just the hard. The hard problem of consciousness is like honestly the least interesting,
right?
Of all these issues to me, but that's the one people tend to focus
on. That and ultimately, this is the direction I'm going to take this thing in, right?
Yeah.
Not even like it's a couple iterations down, but I want us to see that is like our very like broad speaking, like small e ethical conception of ourselves and nature presupposes this error, right? Because the one hand, we want to think of ourselves as minds now that are utterly untethered from having to answer to anything like a natural order whatsoever, right? And then on the other hand, we want to think of nature as this thing that, that is just purely without subjectivity, without value, without purpose, that we can manipulate as we want, right?
Right.
And like go ahead and like pick your modern or postmodern horror show, and you'll find it connected to that, right? Okay, right. Okay, everywhere from like nuclear weapons to
Postmodern horror show.
everywhere, anything from nuclear weapons to the fact that you can declare yourself to be a chicken. Like they can both be seen through that distinction, right?
Indeed, yes. 2 words that are saying the same thing. 3 words,
Exactly.
I guess.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay, so backdrop. All right. So
yeah, good.
now,
Yeah, very good setting. Yep.
All right. So what do we have now? So the problem is, and I call it it's like the great partition, right? Like this is what's going to make modern science possible and modernity possible. We got to partition nature from mind, right? And they got to be separate but equal, right? And an area between shall meet, and you can go ahead and have all your like untethered self-definition going on without worry about answering to nature, and you can have all your technological manipulation without having to worry about answering to meaning or value, right? The problem is mind and nature are not so well behaved, right? There's a lot of like, black market trading going on across the great partition, right? It's very clear that, example I use is if Smitty drinks too much cough syrup, his mind goes pretty sideways, right? And it's pretty clear that his intent to go ahead and drink that cough syrup played a role somewhere in the causal chain of his going ahead and wrecking his neurochemistry, right? So it does seem that there is, in fact, communication across the great divide. Okay. And so now you have like the manifestation that the panpsychists are worried about of the modern divide is the mind-body problem. Like, how is this possible when you've got mind stuff, nature stuff? They're not the same thing. Not even not the same. They are essentially different. They are defined as contradictories. Like either everything is either mind or it's matter. Period. Full stop. Right. Okay. But it looks like these things somehow are
interact. Right.
Interact. How do we make sense of that? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Quantum fields.
Quantum fields. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. So like, okay, step one, right? Like think of like the first person to really get like have the eureka on this problem is Descartes, and he's like, yeah, that is a problem. So what we'll do, we'll just say, hey, you've got you've got 2 different substances. You've got a mental one, you got a physical one, probably your brain, right? And it just must be that there's a gap somewhere in what the brain's doing, that the mental just goes in there and zaps something to go, right? Like he says it's the pineal gland. And literally he picked the pineal gland because they didn't know what it was for, right? He's like, hell, I don't know, pineal gland.
Let's go with that. Let's go with that. Let's go with that dangly
Let's go with that,
right?
Yeah. And so it's mind of the gaps, man. It's like, okay, we don't, like, there's like, so far current state of neuroscience in Descartes' 17th century says, hey, there's something that we don't know what's causing it or what it does.
That's
so maybe
the seat of the soul. That's
the seat of the soul, right? Okay. The problem is the pineal gland is clearly not that thing. There are physical causes interacting with it and all this.
Don't take it out.
So my worry is that and this is Goff is very good on this in his book. It's not that like nature has to be causally closed or anything like that. It's just that it looks like we're not getting any gaps in nature wherein a mind could get in there and do some work. It looks like you're going to have to say mind is epiphenomenal, but that's clearly not the case, right? Okay.
Right.
All right. So quick and dirty, right? Okay. So substance dualism, probably not going to work. Okay. Typical
not for people not trying. I mean, you still have, think of
Yep.
Swinburne and many other, there are many committed substance dualists out there to this very day who do a lot of interesting work. I'm not a substance dualist, but I enjoy reading them, right?
I'm not a substance dualist, but some of my best friends are.
Yeah, indeed. So this is not just like a position that started and died with Descartes. It's
exactly. And the way I always put this, I put this in my first book and I put it here is, I don't think any of the interaction problems are absolute deal breakers for the substance dualist, right?
Oh, I don't think like Swinburne's proposals are crazy at all.
I just think though they force you to bite so many bullets that the position's just gotten so ponderous, right? That one does well to look elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
Right. And I'm going to argue in the second piece. I think just there's kind of an incoherence.
Yeah, I would actually be more inclined to agree with like Swinburne and a substance dualist that a lot of the so-called interaction problems are actually not nearly as problematic as people suggested them
Yeah.
are,
And
right?
yeah. Well,
Not
actually,
to say
yeah,
I don't think
yeah,
that they're not
no,
problematic at all, but I think it's a little overhyped there to them. And it's
yeah,
like, I mean, I also want to
exactly.
steel man the substance
Yeah.
duelist as
No,
well.
I think all of the claims of like, it's sort of weird, right? Okay.
The
Nature's
world
causally
is
closed.
weird,
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah. All that does none of that stuff I think has any traction.
Yeah.
What gets me on substance dualism is just is the fact that it doesn't seem like you're going to find a physical event that goes on in the nervous system that doesn't have sufficient prior physical causes, right? And if that's the case, then you've got at best overdetermination for a distinct soul, right? Okay. And so for me, that and E.J. Lowe's last book was really good on this. I don't ultimately buy it, but it was really good. Like he thinks he kind of bites the bullet over determination and shows how it can work. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Did you read Swinburne's latest? Not to get sidetracked, but did you read his what the heck was it? It was it had a really cool cover. It's like a white cover. And
no,
are we bodies or souls?
Yeah. No, I didn't read it.
It was good. It was good.
Anyway, and so next move is going to be some kind of materialism, right? Some kind of identity theory, right? Okay. The problem, I think, okay, there's lots of problems with identity theory. Okay. A lot of them are familiar. I'm gonna leave those aside. I think the one that's like really that one that Goff presses, and I think he's absolutely right, and it's going to play a role in my critique of his position, right? Is look, the great partition defines the physical and it defines the mental as contradictories, right? Okay. So the idea that you're going to say, hey, it turns out that some empirical discovery and some cleverness about the logic of identity is going to show us that these two things can be the same thing. It's not going to work, right? Like they're defined as essential contradictories. To be physical is not to be mental, according to the Great Partition. To be mental is not to be physical, according to the Great Partition, right? So there's no room to say, it turns out the morning star is the evening star, right? Like by definition, under the Great Partition, these two things are absolutely distinct, and we have to sort things into the two categories.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think you're going to be able to then solve the problem by just collapsing the mental into the physical.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. That's one of the cases Goff makes. I think he's absolutely correct on that. Right. Now,
yeah.
And there's all the standard objections to materialism too that we can do too. Okay.
Yeah. We've been through those, but yeah, I mean, generally you have, well, it's not just like, this is kind of usual in philosophy, at least usual enough, where you have some stubborn data, right? Some recalcitrant data, right? That's just not fitting somewhere. And so you find often there's an eliminativist position and a reductivist position. The eliminativist says it's nothing. The reductivist says it's nothing but, right? And I don't think either of those are going to work. Obviously, I'm neither an eliminativist or a reductivist.
And like the next
move
is always eliminativism, right? You say, there's just no such thing as the mental. And I think
primitive barbarians.
Yeah, exactly. So one, there's just, there's the obvious problem of like self-reference there, right? Can it be an illusion that there are illusions? No, right? So you can't get rid of the mental that way. More interesting to me is, although I think that's a very good problem, right? Okay, but more interesting to me is the fact that the eliminativists, like the Churchland types, they're going to say, well, the mental was part of an explanatory theory, right? And now there's a better explanatory theory out there, so we can just get rid of it, right? So they use the classic, like, hey, like phlogiston had its day, okay, it helped for a while, but now that we have a better explanatory theory of oxygen, we can better explain combustion and rusting without phlogiston, okay? Mm-hmm. Well, I think the problem with that is that assumes that like the taste of my coffee is a theoretical entity that I posit to explain my outward behavior, not that I experience directly.
That's right. Yeah.
You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like no one could experience phlogiston, but we posited it because it made sense of things rusting and things burning. Okay. Right. But then it turned out we got a better overall theory that we can say, phlogiston's a bad way to go. We're going to posit oxygen instead. We can actually verify oxygen better, all that, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But
I'm still on the fence about phlogiston personally.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I don't posit the taste of my coffee, right? Or, moral value or whatever, right? That I have a sense of to explain my behavior. I have a sense of it.
We think we have a direct acquaintance with it. That's right.
Okay,
yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think that my biggest worry about eliminative materialism or illusionism is that it ignores kind of the first order experience of this stuff, right? And it assumes that it's part of a theoretical framework when it's not.
Right. Okay. Yes. Yeah. I think it's riddled with incoherence, self-defeat issues, all sorts of the usual.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just at some point, it's just like we got to draw lines somewhere in philosophy, right?
Yeah.
Like we do, right? I mean, like we entertain crazy ideas all the time, but it's like there has to be some boundaries, right?
Give you some boundary.
Keep us out of the asylum, right? Like I don't know if it's right before eliminativism, but I think maybe it should be. I don't know.
All right. So
I've spent more time thinking about it than I know I should have. So that's it. Yeah.
Okay, so then like next move is always going to be, okay, maybe, okay, so, you know, substance dualism, you know, off the table, right? Materialism off the table, right? Eliminativism off the table. Okay. Well, maybe we could do some kind of emergence. Okay. And, you know, for instance, my stock example on this is, you know, you've got a box made out of plywood and screws, right? And none of the plywood, neither the plywood nor the screws has the property of containability. They cannot contain anything in and of themselves, right? But if you get them together in the right structural arrangement, you get something with containability. Okay. So through arrangement, you get a higher order property. That's exactly how Searle puts it, right? You get a higher order characteristic, a higher order property, right? That is entirely absent at the base level, but it is present at the higher order level. Okay. So the idea then is, hey, maybe we could have a similar relationship between mind and nature, right? They're still completely different. There's no mind at the natural level, right? Okay. But if you get all the stuff arranged the right way, in the same way, if you get the screws and the wood arranged the right way, you get containability out. If you get the neurons and, you know, the other chemicals arranged the right way, maybe you get consciousness out of that. Maybe you get mind out of that, even though there's no mind in nature. And you can still say mind is like a separate realm now because you don't see it at the physical level, right? Okay. You know, increasingly common story that's told. Okay. Now, interesting because I do think that, like, the analogy is interesting there. You know, screws and plywood are to containability as neurons are to, you know, mental properties, right? Okay. The problem though is even in the box example, the screws and the plywood are not alone, like the arrangement of the screws and plywood are not alone enough to explain the containability, right? It makes sense to us because the screws and the plywood have other properties that we can see as like being related to containability. So the wood is impenetrable.
That containability actually reduces to, right?
Yeah. Like the wood is solid or impenetrable, and the screws have binding characteristics or something like that. And understanding like the screwiness, right, and the plywoodiness, right, makes it explains, it makes sense of the containability. There's no mystery.
Right. With the imposition of an accidental form upon
them,
right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it makes perfectly good sense, right, that you would get containability out of, you know, the screwiness and the woodiness, right? Okay. And the problem is there's just nothing about, you know, sodium and potassium moving across membranes of fat or the parts of those parts of those parts of those parts that sheds any light on, you know, qualitative awareness and meaning. Right. There's nothing at all. Okay.
Right. It's and it's hard to see how you could keep pushing that analogy without deeply begging the question. Like, yes, certain things really are reducible. I'm looking at my what's this water, not coffee, I'm in turtle mugs. And we know that we can take a property like liquidity and reduce it to the molecular structure. But wetness?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, or the liquidity, and I think liquidity is Searle's favorite example of emergence, right? You know, he'll say, look, nothing at the base level is liquid, right? Okay, but at the higher level, you've got this whole new thing, sui generis. Yeah, you're right. I think there is emergence going on there. Okay, but it's not mysterious, right? It makes perfectly good sense, right? And so, you know, like you could say, you know, sometime in the future, there'll be a great scientific revolution and it will show us, like, we'll re-understand things such that, you know, there's transparent explanation here. That's all well and good, but, you know, I'm not going to bet on a gap in the neuroscience, and I'm not going to bet on a revolution in physics for my account of mind, right? You know, either way, I think that kind of promissory note stuff, that gap argument stuff, cuts both ways. Right. Okay. All right. So looks like you're running out of options for the Great Divide here, right? For the Great Partition. But here's another one. Here's another kind of emergence. Okay. We've all had this experience where you go into a cafeteria and everybody at their own table is like trying to be quiet, but the overall noise level in the cafeteria is like this crazy loud ruckus, right? You've had this experience, okay? So it does seem like you get a huge volume of sound emerging from a bunch of small sounds, right? The way I put it in the paper is, like every conversation, every table is loud-ish, right? It's on the scale of loud. So it's not surprising if you put a bunch of loud-ish together that you get bona fide loud out of it. Okay. All right. In the same way, like, none of the grains of sand that make up the pile of sand in the sandbox is heavy, but they're all heavy-ish, right? So there's no mystery how additively you could get grains of, like, you could get a heavy grain.
Right. There's not a major qualitative abyss that's being traversed
yeah.
here.
So it's like a coherent, intelligible emergence there. Okay.
Right.
So what if we said that every physical particle in the universe was conscious-ish, right? It was quasi-conscious. I like conscious-ish, right?
I like that too. Yeah.
It's conscious-ish, right? Well, it wouldn't be surprised if you aggregated a bunch of conscious-ish things that you got out of it a great big consciousness, right? And so the idea then would be, hey, so maybe this is how you get mind, right? It's not full-blown mind is not present at the lowest level, but minded-ish is, okay? So nature's still kind of demythologized here, okay? It's kind of, been like purged of mind. Nothing's terribly smart down there, okay? But we've got an account now of how if you aggregated all this stuff, because it's all starting out mind-ish, that you would then get big mind out of it.
Right.
Okay.
And that, my friends, is the case for panpsychism. We got there. Right?
But there's one.
No, I just want to highlight this is where we've been working towards.
So what's our first thing here is like to say, look, like step one for the panpsychist for Goff, every basic physical entity is minded-ish. It's conscious-ish, right? Okay. Now, you got a problem though, because if it's just a matter of like aggregating conscious-ish things, right? Then the great fear that one of my socks is conscious now is going to be a problem, right? So this is always the thing. Like they're like, oh wait, are you saying that your sock is conscious or the folding chair is conscious? As if conscious socks was worse than like conscious, electrons. But
right. I know. Like people are like, hey, my bowl of cereal.
Yeah.
I'm about to eat this thing. It's conscious. Like, no. It's just the electrons. Like that's any less preposterous, right?
Yeah. So here's I think is like Goff's clever move is he says, nah, we're going to put both kinds of emergence together, right? Like you've got consciousness-ish at the lowest level, but it only trips to bona fide consciousness, full-blown consciousness under the right kinds of organization. Okay.
So we can skip the socks and bowls of cereal.
Yeah. So like socks and bowls of cereal aren't properly organized to give you full-blown consciousness, even though their fundamental particles are conscious-ish, right?
Yeah.
But a human brain is so organized. Maybe the brain of, Chancho, the bearded dragon, whatever, right? Maybe it's not quite as organized, right? Okay. And Goff has a very, very, very interesting, almost compelling story to tell about organization in terms of informational integration in the book, which I think is very cool. All right. But you can see now this is panpsychism. Right? It's to say, aha, here's how you get mind from nature. First, we're not going to have the great partition anymore. We're going to have like what I call the near enough partition, right? Where like, yeah, we're not saying mind is completely absent from nature, right? We're going to say it's absent in its fullest sense from nature. Okay. But that lets us account for mind in terms of nature, which is kind of what we want out of this thing. Right. Okay. And so and that's the basic package then. So now you can say, look, nature is devoid of real consciousness where like meaning and purpose in any important sense is available. That's all still in this higher level mind thing, right? And mind in that sense is liberated from nature because it's an emergent feature that's got a kind of autonomy from nature. So we get all of like the political, sociological stuff we want out of modernity still, right? Okay. But we've got a nice scientific account of mind wrapped up, right?
Or so they think, right?
So they think, yeah. Okay. And so I think if you're going to operate inside of the great partition and the assumption that everything has to come out scientifically intelligible, there's
Mhm.
no other way to go but dualism, or but panpsychism.
But panpsychism, right?
But panpsychism. Right? So I think in that way, I'm going to say, yeah, Goff, you're right. Given this box that you, as a good, modern Anglo-American philosopher, like going to insist on operating in, right? Yeah, I don't see how else you can solve this but something like panpsychism.
Yeah.
Right?
See, if I were a materialist, I would first go to eliminativism, but then feeling like that is completely untenable, I feel like I would be driven towards a panpsychism, right? Yeah. So I know this is going to be a series, and we just wanted to do exactly what we just did in this episode and save our further critiques and stuff for part 2. Does that still sound right to you, Professor?
Yes.
All right. So do you want to just pause here? Is there anything else you want to say? And maybe we'll just take a few questions.
I put a link to the Substack article in the show comments there. I'll put it on YouTube too. So have a look at that, because this was quick, right? And the next one should be out, I think, probably next Thursday. Right, so
excellent.
We'll give it about a week. I think that's probably, it's a long paper. So
yeah. So this is just hopefully we've just made it clear, how this theory has emerged. No pun. And the case for it. Yeah. And shall we take a few questions here?
Sure.
Freaky Friday.
Let's do it.
Freaky Friday. Can't be too long. I got to get my guitar strings changed, because as we know, Jim, we got a big gig coming up at the Waukesha County Fair here soon.
Nice.
So yeah, dude.
It is the Amelia Earhart Fest in Atchison, Kansas this weekend. So
it's a big weekend, huh?
It is a big weekend. Yeah. So if you're in Northeast Kansas and you have nothing else to do, come stand around and
on down.
Yeah.
Brendan says, I'm a phaser bro, but Jim has been right about a lot of things, like the Rockford Files. So we're on season 4 of the Rockford Files.
Nice,
now.
You're chipping away.
Man, that show, yeah, we are. Man, my wife loves it. So I don't think Jim or I either like fundamentally disagree with phaser. I think Jim definitely thinks about the issue differently than phaser. That's always I was hesitant about this title, The Case for Panpsychism, because I'm like, people are going to think that we're advocates of this.
Yeah.
I'm not.
No, I'm not.
I mean, like, maybe. I mean, there are. You know what? I wanted to read one before, because I'll forget to do it next time. But let me read something from David Bentley Hart that I think summarizes it really well. Can you spare me 2 paragraphs here? He'll kind of just. This will be a teaser for what's to come, at least from my side, in the next episode. So Hart says this in his Hartian rhetoric, which is always fascinating, right? Rather. I'm starting mid-paragraph, so just assume there's some other context here. Rather, it openly presumes the metaphysical fantasy of material panpsychism, the notion that consciousness is a universal property existing from a subatomic level upward, not produced by matter, but rather constituting the subjective side of every material reality. Consciousness does not emerge from matter because everything is conscious already. What is emergent is merely the complexity of systems of interaction. I have to say, he's great with prose. There's no doubt about Hart with that, and a great thinker in many respects too. I think he's spot on about what he's going to say in these next couple lines. He continues, I have to say, while there are various idealist forms of panpsychism that make sense to me, my every encounter with the materialist version of the idea makes me feel rather as if I have stepped through the looking glass and I'm listening to Kant's second and third critiques being expounded by Humpty Dumpty. He reminds me, his writing is so reminiscent of H.L. Mencken, which is very funny. If anybody's ever read H.L. Mencken, he's clearly influenced by H.L. Mencken. Let me continue. For one thing, the basic paradox of the presence of mind within a mechanistic universe remains unchanged. It has simply been moved to a more basic level. One and the same atom possesses 2 utterly contradictory aspects, the nomological and the pathological, to misuse the Kantian term. The one objective, deterministic, mechanical, and empirical, and the other subjective, intentional, teleological, and transcendental. And the interaction between them is no less mysterious for having been atomized. More to the point, the very notion that consciousness can be conceived as a cumulative quantity whose smaller units can combine into larger unified aggregates is self-evidently absurd. Consciousness is not, contrary to what Tanuni and Koch claim, a property, at least not in the way that, say, mass, color, or any other predicable attribute is. It is an act, one with a specific phenomenological shape, an indivisible apperceptive unity and intentionality, a logically prior and transcendental simplicity that organizes the many into one, a subjective vantage formally constitutive of the totality it perceives. It is not the effect of material integration, but the power that integrates experience from an irreducibly simple perspective. And it is bizarre that Koch, having recognized that unified intentional consciousness is irreducible to neurological complexity, fails to see that it is also irreducible to minute particles of information. But he has failed to see it. And then he continues on. But I think that perfectly summarizes.
That's really cool. He's basically giving a Kantian critique of panpsychism,
right?
Which is cool. Because he's very cool. And what I'm going to do in the next piece is I'm going to give a Hegelian critique of panpsychism.
Yeah. I won't have much different to say than what Hart just did, but I will expand upon some of those points from my perspective on this. But
no, I think his move there, he it's very Kantian move. He's identifying consciousness with Kant's transcendental subject, right? The thing that accounts for the unity of the particulars of experience, right? And so to see that as something that's like divisible into things and then thereby gets aggregated is just silly. Yeah. Well played. Yeah.
He's also one of the few people that legitimately makes me laugh out loud when I in philosophy. When I read philosophy, is one of the few people that makes me laugh out loud. I don't get how some of the stuff even gets published. It's so rhetorical, but God bless them. All right, let's take a question or two here. I don't know. I don't know the answer to this one, Jim. Maybe you do. Does Galileo get the idea of geometry in everything is in everything in the world from Euclid? I mean, imagine he was very, very familiar with the elements, right? Yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't get it as like somehow it's a claim of Euclid's, right? But it's interestingly like prior to Leibniz, right? All these guys had to like figure out the mathematics of the new science was basically Euclidean geometry, right? I mean, so like if you go through Newton's elements or his Principia, pardon me, all the proofs in there are done in Euclidean geometry. Like he's doing calculus without algebra. Like he does. Okay, Leibniz actually has an algebraic, like the algebraic system you learned when you learned calculus in like college or high school, or whatever, is Leibniz's, right? Newton did it without the symbols, right? Okay, it's I got it in my head once. I was going to go through.
Yeah, you can just read it. Yeah, right.
Well, I got it in my head once. I was just going to go through and do the proofs, follow the proofs in Principia. I was like, no, I need the algebra. I'm not that good, right? But anyway, it's a fun exercise, but I lasted about 20 minutes, right? But anyway, and so there, if you really want like a great introduction to exactly what Galileo did and why it led to the Great Partition, check out John Hoglin's book, Artificial Intelligence, The Very Idea. Artificial Intelligence, The Very Idea. And he goes through a couple of, maybe even just one, of Galileo's proofs and shows how, like, he did something really incredible. Like he took basic Euclidean geometry, which is designed to only deal with static space, and he was able to represent times by points in Euclidean space, and then thereby make a proof about the motion, right, the predicted position of a planet, right? It's absolutely brilliant, right? And then so it looks like, hey, it doesn't seem like there has to be a similarity between our imagination of things and what's actually making the prediction. Ergo, there's a split, right?
Yeah, beautiful. Callum, hold on to your question about Nasus and Dante. Gavin's coming back on Tuesday. We can take it there. But let me just say very quickly, that's right. He does not think that Dante gives you the proof for God. He thinks you need the 5 ways for that, and then you go back and I very much disagree with that, but that is the position that he holds. And there's other Thomists that follow him, like Delfino, I think, follows Nasus in that. But Gavin will be back on Tuesday, so that'll be a good topic for them. Yeah. All right, Jim's got another one here. I'll read it. Is panpsychism also related to Averroes and his world soul idea, or is panpsychism more about the individual things having psyches instead of one psyche for the world? Professor, what say you?
Kind of want to say, well, I definitely want to say no to the first question. Okay, because what is Averroes doing? He's actually pulling on Aristotle's notion that seems like he thinks that the separated intellect is all one thing, right?
Mhm.
And it's all God. Okay, and so you get a world soul that way, right? That's not panpsychism in the way that that phrase is used in contemporary philosophy.
Right.
Right?
You would need an idealist panpsychist to find something like that.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think there's like better ways to put like maybe so in I actually want to like okay so but Aristotle's an idealist. Like Averroes is not an idealist. They're not
No,
saying
they're
that
not.
somehow the world is a thought. They're just saying there's a separated intellect and there's just the one, right? Okay,
Right.
and it's my understanding. I'm not an expert on Averroes, but it's that what do they call it? The monopsychism. There's really only one rational soul, right? And we're all participants in it, right? Okay. The other question is it about individual things having psyches? I even want to be careful with that, right? Because in fairness to Goff, he's not saying every quark and lepton has a full blown psyche, right? They're psyche-ish, right? They're now of course that's always a cheat, right? They have like very, very absolute fundamental rudiments of subjectivity. They're not full blown subjectivities, right?
Right.
This is yeah.
Which is a very strange, and people seem to vary on how they want to articulate that, right? Because this is one of the this is itself one of the debates in consciousness, right? Is consciousness something that can fade, right? Can you sort of dim it, or is it something that
Yeah.
either has to be there? It's like an on and off switch, right? It's either
Yeah.
there or it's not. And I'm definitely in the latter camp. I mean, if we think of it in terms of representation, it can make sense to say that you might be able to represent less, but representing less is no less of a representation. Either
Right.
representation is there or it's not. There's no middle ground, right?
Right.
And once you recognize that, I think these suggestions of ish, they don't really either survive or it's just going to make issues a lot worse. But again, I don't want to get ahead of what ourselves in this. Right?
But the thing too though is I think a lot of the objections that you can give someone like Goff, I think they'll say, yeah, all well and good, but what other if you're operating in this box, right? Great partition, scientific intelligibility, what other option there is? There must be ish, right? In the same way that when you look at what the demands of divine simplicity are, right? Okay, we've got to kind of make something up, right? Like an analogy here, right? That there's nothing to motivate it, but that you've got a proof for a first cause, right? And you've got other pressures on us, from other directions in our natural theology, and therefore there must be some middle ground here. I know not what. You know what I mean? So I think that kind of move is available to anybody as long as they're willing to say I'm operating within certain set of first principles or other demonstrations, right?
Yeah. I guess I don't see the analogy, even if using analogy between simplicity and fading qualia or something like that. It just seems
Well, I mean,
like
we do have to say very weird things about divine simplicity.
that's
right?
true. Right.
Okay, that are hard, like, and there's nothing to motivate them outside. Like, there's no like these concepts like don't have application outside of divine simplicity, right? Well, I think someone like Goff could say, yeah, I agree. I have to say something really weird about consciousness-ish here, and there's no application of that outside of what I'm doing. But this has been dictated by the deductive stream I'm on here.
Yeah,
right?
let's
And
think about
so,
that. That's interesting. So
yeah,
what do we say about divine simplicity? We need stretch concepts, right? And
yeah,
we need to say that God is the limit case instance of whatever it is that we're positively predicating
yeah,
of him, right? So he's the limit case instance of power. He's the limit case instance of knowledge. He's the limit case instance of goodness. And all these things are actually one and the same being considered under a different aspect.
yeah,
And a limit case is something like the difference between going really slow and being at a standstill, right? It's something that these predicables point to, but can never completely converge upon without sort of transcending themselves. That's how I
yeah,
understand divine simplicity. But and that's strange. Like,
yeah.
granted, like that's not something that we're familiar with. But I don't see an immediate incoherence or impossibility to that. Like something saying that something is conscious-ish, right? Like
Yeah.
either it's there, it's there, or it's
Yeah,
not, or we're
but
not talking about a representation.
but
Right?
here's the deal: is like I mean, without going through the drama of like natural theology, right?
Yeah.
I think someone would look at the concept of divine simplicity as you spell it out there and say, well, that seems really silly, right? You know what I mean? But what holds it in place is the prior deductions that you've done to get yourself in a position where you have no choice but to bite the bullet and like engineer something here, right? That doesn't mean it's wrong, because if the other deductions are correct, then this is right. If it's the only way to go, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I think someone like Goff could say, yeah, I agree with you. Like, it's really, really odd, and it's not at all what we would have thought consciousness to be, something to be ish, right? But the deductive stream has gotten me here.
Yeah. So I guess I just would deny many aspects of that. I think you're right to say that might be what Goff say, but I don't see a deductive stream analogous to panpsychism.
Well, here you go. You got to go with partition, and you got to go with intelligibility. All the other options for doing it don't work, right? Therefore, panpsychism is the last man standing. The only way panpsychism works is consciousness-ish. There you go, right?
Yeah, I guess I would just be more inclined to say at that point that it's not ish. It just is, like, maybe it is conscious, right? So my problem isn't denying panpsychism out. My problem is if you're thinking that something can be in between.
Yeah.
A state of not representing and representing. That's my problem, right? You see what I'm saying, right?
Yeah. So what you're doing there, though, is you're denying one of the principles, right? Like, one of the principles is, like, you can't have full-blown conscious things in nature according to the great partition, right? Okay, well, fair, I agree with you. Like, deny that, right? You know what I mean? But what we're doing there is we're going back and denying one of the first principles. And my point is only that, given the first principles, I don't think there's any other way you can go here.
Yeah.
Right.
And I would just say, if I was a panpsychist, I would say what I mean is there's less representation, right? Or there's representing less, but I don't mean that there's any less of representation. That's what I would want to say, if that makes sense. If I'm trying to steelman panpsychism. So let me clarify. I wasn't saying this is to throw out panpsychism in general. My critique is really towards people who think that there can be this middle ground.
Yeah. When
using the term ish when it comes to consciousness or whatever. Not in the way that you're using. I understand how you're using it. My targets are more in these. Yeah.
I do think, though, and this could get us into worries about how good something like Bentley Hart's Kantian objection is, right? Because there does seem to be a middle ground between, like, Kant's unity of apperception, right, and the kind of sentience that a lizard has, right? Like, the lizard doesn't, I don't think we're going to say, has a transcendental subject, right? Do you see what I mean? So then it does seem you've got a continuum of consciousness there, right? You've got the sort of disarrayed consciousness of a lizard, and then you have then you have the unified consciousness of a conceptually enabled subject, right? And so already I think it's pretty clear that there is a continuum of levels of consciousness, right?
Yeah, and that I think it makes sense to say that you can have more representation. You can represent more, even if it's not more of a representation or less of a representation, if that makes sense. I don't want to speak too much on the Kantian critique, because I'm just not as much of a Kant scholar to speak intelligently on that. But Callum asked, who was I reading earlier? And that was David Bentley Hart. And if you want his more of his critiques of panpsychism, what are some of his works? The Experience of God has a pretty hefty section on philosophy of mind. And he spends a good number of pages kind of poring over panpsychism in that. So this is good, Jim. I like this. I like when we find, like, a little area to hash out between the two of us too. It's always good and fun. So all right, so tease part two, Jim. What do you have cooking up for us in your Substack series? Where can people subscribe to that, and what can they expect in the next conversation?
Yeah, next one's going to be a Hegelian argument that the panpsychism is ultimately incoherent. Right? Right. So that's what it will be, right? And then the next piece will kind of be like a Marcuse type critique of it, like, politically and culturally. Yeah.
Oh boy, this will be good. This will be good.
Yeah.
No, I really love one thing I really appreciate, and this is why it's again, I have no fundamental disagreements with the way Phaser approaches it, but I really like the sociological aspect and I guess the political motivations, explicit or implicit, in something like this. I mean, that can't be overlooked. We know how humans operate, right? And I think that's a really important thing to pull out there. So we'll be getting more of that, I suspect.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Where is what's the title of your Substack, and how can people?
So right
hop on that?
now, it's just JD Madden's newsletter. Right.
So it's not the
Uh,
Journal of Absolute Truth like mine.
no,
I'll pop
yeah.
mine in
I wanted to go with, as you know, the Journal of Universal Wisdom, which was,
there. Dude, please do it so I could be
but
the
it's
absolute
probably
truth. And
copywritten
then,
already, right?
and then
Because
we'll publish in each other's
yeah,
journals.
yeah. It's probably copywritten because there really was a Journal of Universal Wisdom that was published by a UFO cult in the 70s, right? So
Oh, that's great.
I know I really want to get some back issues of the Journal of Universal Wisdom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I don't
Hold
know if
on, I'm grabbing the link to yours. It's just I'm gonna drop it in the chat here so people have
yeah.
that.
You
And
want me to drop it?
subscribe. I got it's already there.
Yep.
So yeah, guys, please subscribe to Substack. Jim just hopped on. I've been on Substack for a while. I've got a ton of posts on there now. I just put up one today on why God cannot be a primary substance. So just going, just sticking in my usual wheelhouse there. I'll venture out into more exotic territories. Is when can I do that, Jim? Do I have to be 40, 45, something like that?
Yeah, I think so. I think probably 40.
Yeah, that sounds good.
You-
Sweet, man.
By the time you're 40, you know, you're grouchy enough to get weird, and no one's gonna really, or you don't really care, right? So yeah.
Right. Yeah. Anything else you want to announce? How about your course?
Oh yeah, as always, on Gumroad, I'll drop a link on the YouTube. There's my course on my most recent one is on Heidegger's philosophy of technology,
Nice.
which will not be irrelevant really to my cultural critique of panpsychism. So let me grab that link here for us real quick.
Please do. And guys, if you benefit from this channel, please consider taking advantage of our pay what you want courses. So you can get them for free if you want to pay what you want. Actually, you can't for mine. I think mine I have a minimum $1, but Jim's you can get for free.
Yeah, because
mine has too much. Mine has too much. Is so fat of content that
exactly.
it literally made me charge something. So I had to charge at least $1. So it's at least $1 for mine. But you can tip
because you have like papers in there, right? Or like
papers and uploaded videos and all sorts of stuff. So it was a hosting issue. Yeah,
mine's just mine come as a PDF of a syllabus that has links to the material within it, which is a way to sneak around the dollar thing.
That's
right? But hey, if you want to give me $1, I mean that's fine. I mean I'm not a proud man, Pat, as you know.
No, indeed. He's got to buy his protein powder. All right, guys.
I got to buy my protein powder, man.
Thanks for tuning in. Please like, share, comment. This will be the first part in the series, as we said. So we'll catch you all next time. Have a good Freaky Friday, everybody. Peace.